Wyoming Territory. 1883, the wind howled cold across the basin as Penelope O'Conner dropped to her knees in the hard, packed dirt, one hand on her swollen belly, the other bracing herself against the broken fence post. She had been walking since dawn. Her boots were soaked from the creek she had crossed earlier, and the hem of her dress was stiff with mud. The farmhouse was long behind her now, empty, silent, and not worth turning back for. Her husband had left 3 months ago. Rode off for Cheyenne with a promise to send money soon. There had been no word since. No money either. Now she was 8 months pregnant, hungry, cold, and alone. She had nothing left but the clothes on her back and the ache in her legs. The wind carried the scent of pine and horses. She looked up, squinting against the setting sun. A lone rider was coming down the ridge, silhouetted against the gold sky. She reached for the fence post again, trying to haul herself up, but her knees buckled. The rider dismounted fast. Boots hit the dirt. A man's voice broke through the wind. "Miss, hey, do not move. Let me help." Strong arms caught her just as she slumped forward. He lowered her gently to the ground, one hand steadying her back. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his voice was warm. "My name's Lawson Finch. You are all right now." "I have got you." "I am not all right," she whispered. "I am done." He crouched beside her, one hand on her shoulder. "You are not. You are just tired. Where were you headed?" She shook her head. "Anywhere but back there." His eyes scanned the horizon, then returned to her face. "All right. My cabin is a mile west. I've got a roof, a fire, and beans on the stove." She looked at him, dazed. "You live alone." "Just me and the quiet," he said. "But I will take you there. No trouble." She hesitated, then nodded. What choice did she have? He helped her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, one arm steady around her waist. She leaned against him, too tired to speak. The warmth of his coat, the steady rhythm of the horse, she let herself drift. The cabin came into view just as dusk settled. It was small, square, with smoke curling from the chimney. Lawson helped her down, then carried her inside like she weighed nothing. The fire was already lit. He set her gently on a cot near the hearth, then brought a blanket to wrap around her. "Can you eat?" She nodded. He handed her a bowl of beans and cornbread. She ate slowly, her hands shaking. He did not ask questions, not yet. Just sat on the floor across from her, watching the fire, giving her space. Later, when she had eaten and the silence stretched too long, he finally said, "Do you have family out here?" She stared into the fire. "No one. My folks passed when I was 16, married too young. He left before the first frost." She looked down at her belly. "I do not even know if he is alive." Lawson's jaw tightened. He shifted closer, resting his arms on his knees. "You should not have been out there alone." "I had no choice," he nodded slowly. "You do now." She looked up, startled. "I've got enough hope for both of us," he said simply. Her throat tightened. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because you are not a stranger anymore," he said, "and because no one should have to do this alone." Penelope blinked fast, fighting tears. "I have not heard something like that in a long time." He reached out, gentle, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Well, get used to it." She let out a soft breath. Warmth spread through her chest for the first time in months. That night, she slept on the cot while Lawson dozed in a chair nearby. The storm rolled in, but for the first time in a long while, Penelope did not feel afraid. Over the next days, she found herself leaning on him more. Not just for help getting around or cooking meals, but in the quiet moments when she would wake from nightmares and find him already stoking the fire, or when she caught him carving a little wooden horse for the baby, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He never pushed, never pried. Just steadied her when she needed it. And more than once, she caught him watching her with something in his eyes, something like wonder. One morning, she stood at the window. her hands resting on the sill, watching the snowflakes drift down. Lawson came up behind her, quiet as always. "You are looking stronger," he said. "I feel stronger," she admitted. He smiled. "I told you, my hope is still holding steady." She looked at him. Really looked. He had sandy brown hair, a scar along his jaw, and eyes the color of the river in spring. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 28 or so, but there was something about him that felt older. Like he had seen too much and come out the other side steady. She looked down at her belly. "What if I cannot do this?" "You can," he said. "And you will. And I will be right here." Her chest tightened again, but in a different way. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He reached for her hand, slow and careful. "Because you are worth it." She stared at their joined hands. Her throat burned. She had not been touched with kindness in so long. It felt like learning how to breathe again. "Lawson," she said softly, "I do not have anything to give you." He stepped in closer, his voice low. "I am not asking for anything. I just want you safe." She looked up at him. "No one has ever said that to me." He brushed his thumb along her knuckles. "Well, then I will say it again. You are safe with me." Her eyes filled. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled. A real one, and Lawson smiled back, like the sun had come out just for him. They stood there a long time, snow falling outside, fire crackling behind them. Neither moved. Neither needed to. And for the first time in a very long time, Penelope O'Conner felt something bloom in her chest. Hope. Lawson came back from checking the trap line with snow caught in his beard and a rabbit slung over his shoulder. The cabin was warmer now, the logs holding the day's heat better since he'd chinked the cracks with moss and mud while Penelope napped. He set the rabbit on the table, brushing the cold from his sleeves. She was sitting by the fire with her feet up, knitting with slow, careful movements. She hadn't said where the yarn came from. He figured it had been stuffed in the bottom of her satchel, the only thing she'd brought with her besides a cracked comb and a Bible with the cover torn half off. The needles clicked gently, and her eyes stayed on the flames. "You feelin' all right?" he asked, hanging his coat near the stove. She nodded but didn't look up. "Strange," she said after a moment. "I thought I'd be more afraid this close to the end, but I'm not." He crouched to stir the fire. "You're not alone in it." "That helps." "I suppose it does." Her voice was quiet but not tentative. He wasn't cruel, just hollow, always somewhere else, even when he sat right in front of me. I think he wanted to be a better man, but he didn't know how to stay put. Lawson didn't answer right away. He tossed another log on the fire, watched the sparks lift. Some men run when they see something good, figure if they break it first, it won't have the chance to leave them. She finally looked over. "Is that what you did?" "No," he said. "I stayed too long in the wrong places. Until it nearly ruined me." The knitting paused. "What happened?" He leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "I worked cattle for a man near Fort Laramie. Good stock, bad temper. He'd take his anger out on the hands when he drank. One night he went after a kid with a branding iron. I stopped him." Her brow creased. "Did the boy make it?" "He did. I left the next day after the man's brother threatened to see me shot. Been moving since." Penelope set the knitting aside, folding her hands over her stomach. "You ever think about going back?" He shook his head. "Some folks don't change, and I've got no interest in waiting around to see if they do." She studied him a long moment. "So why stop here? Why build a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" He smiled faintly. "The quiet suits me. And I guess I was waiting on something I didn't know I was waiting for." The corners of her mouth lifted, just barely. "You're not much for idle talk, are you?" "No, ma'am." "But I mean what I say." She looked down at her hands, then out the window, where the snow had stopped and the twilight carried a soft hush. "Tomorrow, I'll start sewing some cloths for the baby. I've got scraps in my bag I can stitch together." I'll fetch more firewood in case the weather turns. And I'll clean the rabbit for supper." She nodded, then hesitated. "Lawson," he turned. "You think," she said slowly, "a child can grow up all right in a place like this? With just a cabin and beans, and two people who are still learning how to trust each other." He crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. "I think if that child is warm and fed and loved, he'll have more than most." Her throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. "And if I'm not enough, you will be," he said, "but you won't be alone in it." She reached out then, not tentative, not trembling, just steady. Her fingers wrapped around his, and he let her pull his hand into her lap. The baby shifted beneath her skin, and Lawson felt it through her palm, a small flutter against his calloused hand. They both stilled. "That's the first time he's kicked that strong," she whispered. He didn't say anything, just held her hand until the fire burned down to coals. The snow had melted down to patches of crust along the shaded edges of the trees by the time Penelope's labor began. It was just past dawn, the light thin and yellow through the frost-glazed windows. She stood at the table, one hand flat against the wood, the other pressed to her back. Her breathing had changed short and sharp, like she was bracing herself against something that wouldn't stop. Lawson was piling kindling into the stove when she spoke. "It's starting." He turned, still crouched. "Now," she nodded once, jaw tight. "Early." "But it's happening." He straightened fast. "All right, you sit. I'll boil water." She didn't argue, just eased herself into the chair with both hands gripping the table's edge. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. He stoked the fire higher and filled the kettle, then moved through the cabin with quiet determination, gathering the linens she'd washed and folded days ago, the knife he'd sharpened, the tin basin. They hadn't spoken much about this moment. It had hung between them, sure and silent, like the mountains outside, always there, never mentioned. But now it was here, and he moved with the calm of a man who'd already decided he wouldn't fail her. She gritted her teeth through a tightening that bent her forward. "You ever done this before?" "No," he said. "But I listened close when the midwife in Rawlins explained what to expect, thought it might come in handy." Her brow lifted faintly. "You planned for this." "I hoped for it," he said. She exhaled a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Then another wave gripped her, and she leaned forward, gripping the edge of the chair, her face pressed to her sleeve. Lawson knelt beside her, his hand steady on her knee. "You're not alone," he said. "I know that now." It went on for hours. The sun climbed slow overhead, then began its tilt westward. Penelope shifted between the cot and the chair, her hair damp against her neck, her skin flushed. Lawson stayed at her side, offering water, wiping her brow, bracing her arms when she pushed. The baby came just as the light turned gold against the cabin wall. A boy, small, loud, red-faced, alive. Penelope cradled him in trembling arms, her face drawn with exhaustion, streaked with sweat and tears. Lawson wrapped them both in a clean quilt and sat beside her on the cot, one hand resting gently along her arm. "He's got your chin," he said. She looked down at the child, her lips parted in wonder. "He's real. More real than anything." She didn't speak for a long while. Just looked and breathed and let the weight of it settle. "What'll you call him?" Lawson asked softly. "Thatcher," she said. "That was my father's name." Lawson nodded. "Strong name, he'd be proud." She looked at him then, eyes swollen from tears but clear. "I didn't think I'd survive this. I thought I'd break. You didn't. You helped me hold." He swallowed hard, voice low. "I meant it when I said it. I've got enough hope for both of us." Her gaze didn't waver. "I think I've started to believe you." He smiled, slow and quiet, the way he always did when something mattered. The fire cracked low behind them. Thatcher squirmed, let out a soft breath, then settled against her chest. Penelope leaned her head to Lawson's shoulder, her hair falling loose across his sleeve. "I want to stay," she said. He turned his hand palm up, waiting. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "Then stay," he whispered. Outside, the wind had stilled. The trees stood silent under the last of the snow. Inside, the fire glowed steady, and the cabin held its small, growing family close. Penelope stepped out beneath the porch beam, Thatcher bundled against her chest in a sling sewn from an old linen apron. The sky had opened into spring without fanfare, just a slow warming of the earth. The snow, retreating like a held breath, finally let go. The creek below the ridge ran louder now, swollen with meltwater. Lawson knelt by the fence rail, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. He was mending the last stretch of split posts. She watched the way his shoulders moved when he drove the nail through green wood, the way he paused to measure twice before setting the next. There was something reverent in the way he built things, as if the work itself held meaning beyond the timber. Thatcher stirred, his face tight with a waking yawn. She adjusted the sling and stepped down the porch, careful not to slip on the mud where snow had pooled days earlier. Lawson looked up as she approached. "He's sleepin' all right. Almost 2 hours," she said. "He's starting to tell night from day. Smart boy." She leaned against the fence while he reached for another rail. Her hands rested lightly on the sling. "I've been thinking about planting something," she said. "Not much, just a patch near the back wall that catches sun. Beans maybe. Or squash." He set the hammer down and straightened. "I've got some seed left from last season. You'd need a spade and good patience." "I've got both," she said, "and it'd be something to tend to." Lawson nodded, brushing his palms down his trousers. "I'll turn the soil for you this evening." She looked out toward the tree line. "It's strange. I used to be afraid of quiet like this, thought it meant I'd been forgotten, but now it feels full." He leaned an elbow against the fence. "Sometimes the land speaks best when it's quiet." Penelope glanced at him. "You always talk like that, only when I care what the answer might be." She smiled, but not in amusement. It was a soft recognition, the kind that settled deep in the chest. Thatcher let out a small sound, and she rocked on her heels, soothing him. Her eyes stayed on Lawson. "I used to think love would be loud," she said. "Big gestures, promises shouted across the room, but now I wonder if it's more like this." Lawson didn't move. "Like what?" "Like fixing fences and handing over seeds, like listening when no one else does." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, without looking away, he asked, "You sure you're ready for something like that again?" She nodded. "I don't want to carry what broke me. I want to build something with someone who knows how to mend things." Lawson stepped forward, slow and certain. His hand lifted to rest gently against Thatcher's back, his fingers brushing the edge of the sling. "Then we'll build it, the three of us." Penelope's breath caught, not from surprise but from the ease of it, the rightness. No declarations, no demands, just the quiet certainty of a man who meant what he said. Thatcher's eyes blinked open, unfocused and new, and Lawson smiled at him with the quiet joy of someone who understood the weight of small miracles. Penelope reached for Lawson's hand. "I want to stay here, not just for now." He laced his fingers with hers. "Then it's yours." "All of it." They stood together by the new fence, the sun tracing light across the ridge, the earth thawed and waiting. Inside the cabin, the fire lay banked, the kettle warm. Everything ahead of them was unwritten good land, strong roots, and the promise of something that would hold. 4 months passed. The garden behind the cabin had taken root, neat rows of squash and beans pressing through the earth with quiet determination. Penelope knelt between the furrows, her skirts hitched above her boots, hands dark with soil. The sun was warm on the back of her neck, and the steady breath of her son stirred softly against her as he slept in the sling. Lawson stood at the edge of the woods, axe resting against his shoulder, a fresh-cut bundle of cedar stacked by his feet. He watched her carefully dust soil from her palms, the simple grace in her movements, the way she tilted her head to listen for any sound from Thatcher. She didn't need him to step in, but she always looked up when he did. "I found some wild mint near the creek," he called. "Figured it might help with the flies." She rose, brushing her hands on her apron. "That'll go nicely with the vinegar. I've been meaning to try soaking cloths in it." He walked toward her, laying the cedar down near the shed. "You've taken to this land like you were born for it." "I wasn't," she said, "but it doesn't mind that." He reached to adjust the brim of his hat, then let his hand fall. "You think it's enough? What we've built here?" She looked at the ridgeline, the cottonwoods thickening, the fence holding strong. "It's more than I ever let myself want." That evening, after Thatcher had been fed and tucked into his cradle with a ribbon of blue sky still lingering through the shutters, Penelope stepped outside. Lawson was oiling the hinges on the barn door, sleeves rolled, lantern burning on a hook. She walked to him, arms crossed against the breeze. "You remember when you first found me by that broken fence?" she asked. He set the oil can down. "I remember every part of that day." "I was ready to give up," she said. "Not just on the road, on everything." He met her gaze without flinching. "And now, I've never wanted so much from life, and I've never been more afraid of losing it." He took a step toward her. "You won't. You can't promise that." "I can promise I'll fight for it, every day." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I want to marry you." The words surprised them both. Not because they hadn't been coming, just because she'd spoken them first. Lawson didn't hesitate. "Then we will. We'll take Thatcher, ride to the preacher near Medicine Bow. I'll put your hand in mine and vow what I already live every day." She laughed, quiet and full. "That's not how I imagined it would feel." "How's that?" "Soft, certain." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "You deserve that." They married the following week, in a small clapboard church with a dusty floor and a hymn sung low by a woman with a voice like river gravel. Thatcher squirmed in Penelope's arms as the preacher spoke, and Lawson stood tall beside them, his best shirt pressed, his boots clean for the first time in months. Afterward they rode home slow, the sun dipping behind them, the sky wide with quiet joy. Years passed. The cabin grew with them 2 added rooms, a stone hearth, a loft where Thatcher eventually slept with his books and his slingshot tucked under his pillow. Penelope kept a ledger in the cupboard, tracking seed and trade, her handwriting neat and strong. Lawson built a barn, broke a second field, and taught their boy to ride with the same calm patience he'd once offered her. They argued sometimes about where to plant, about how many hens to keep, but never about the things that mattered. Those were settled. One morning, after the first snow of a new winter, Penelope woke with her husband's arm around her waist and her child's laughter echoing from the kitchen where he was trying to heat biscuits without burning them. She pressed her hand to Lawson's and smiled into the morning light. She'd come to Wyoming with nothing but a name and a child in her belly. Now she had a home, a family, and a love that had grown like roots deep, unseen and unshakable. They stayed there for the rest of their days, and it was enough. It was everything.